Dawson Rider Review.
Hey YouTube, Dawson Rider here. Welcome to my review for the Power Rangers in Space Red Ranger and Astronema Lightning Versus pack. So this is first of one of the two new Versus packs. They're basically like the two packs we've gotten before, but they're calling them Versus as they're trying to make it sort of a specific matchup. But this one obviously works really well, being the brother-sister combo of Andros and Astronema, and it's super cool. And as you can see in the back, they get that cool dual packaging that has the cool art on it. And when you open the flaps up, it has like the full art because it's on the side here too. So that's kind of neat. So if you're a box collector, that's cool. And apparently they're also doing one of those limited Target package ones someone just found like literally the day I'm recording this. So if you're into that, you can also pick up that limited packaging. But let's go ahead and dive right in with Andros. Okay, so starting with Andros, accessories-wise, obviously you can see he has the Spiral Saber, and then he's got the Astro Blaster on his sidearm, which we'll go over when we get to him in a second. He's got the two hands on him now, which one is holding weapons, and the other one is just a closed fists, and the other one here is the holding weapons one, which I took off. And then you kind of have that signature pose hand that he comes with, and then of course he does come with the civilian head, which I think is pretty well done. I think they're getting better at these. There's definitely still some hit and miss, but I think for the most part they're getting a little bit better as they go, and I think this is a pretty solid one. I still kind of wish they had a little bit more expression, because even on ones they get right, they always look so dead inside. But then when they try to give them personality, they end up super creepy like Kim and Billy, so I don't know. As far as the Spiral Saber goes, I think it's fine. Like, it could look a little bit better. Honestly, my only complaint is I think it just looks a little dull. But honestly, it's not that exciting of a weapon. Like, there's certain weapons that have really intricate details and bright colors that they might mess up, and it looks a little bad and cheap. Spiral Saber is basically just silver and black, so even if they skimped on the red, I wouldn't be that mad, because it's not that exciting of a weapon detail-wise. And the blaster overall looks solid. I don't really have any too huge of complaints about this. I think they did a good job on it. You know, maybe I could nitpick and say that the gray here on the top for the blade could be a little shinier, but for the most part, I'm happy with it, and I'm not gonna, you know, want to send this back to Hasbro for an absolutely not top-tier painted Astro Blaster. Now getting on to the figure itself, I think it's a mostly solid figure, but kind of like In Space Yellow, there's something slightly off for me. It's more nitpicky and personal than anything. Just the helmet looks a little bit strange to me. I think it's mostly solid, but there's just something off about it. I think it's a little bit fat and odd shaped in some angles. Again, that could just be me. I talked about that in my In Space Yellow review, and some people said that I was crazy and that it was completely accurate, so it could just be me. But I just thought I'd mention it since it is my review, that it seems a little off. But again, nothing where I'm gonna be like throwing demands at Hasbro or anything. My actual only real major complaint about the helmet is you can see that the paint is a little bit off. It seems, oh, major complaint, this slight off bit. But I mean, they don't line up. I've had ones like that in the past, like Silver Stripe Green, where the two whites in the middle don't meet, and it's like they did two different stickers and they didn't overlap them right, and that can be a little bit annoying. I'm grateful that since this was an online order, that I didn't have one that had like a white paint streak down here or something, but that definitely is kind of annoying. But I think the red color and the yellow color and the white color on here all look good. The articulation's all solid, no loose joint problems or anything. You know, despite the fact that I think the helmet looks a little bit off, this is still a pretty dang solid looking figure. It's one of those weird ones that's just kind of in between for me, where some of the Lightning figures I'm like, oh man, this has a couple little problems, but it's really, really good. And the other ones that, like, you know, maybe Mighty Morphin Red, where I'm like, oh man, this is so off with the helmet. But this one kind of sits in the middle where there's something slightly off, but I can't really say it's an awful figure. I still think it's pretty dang solid. And like I said, the articulation is your par for the course articulation. I don't have any loose joint problems or anything like that, so that's nice. I really haven't had too many problems with that in the line so far in general, so that's kind of nice. But let's go ahead and take a look at them compared to previous releases so we can see which is one of the best ones that have come out so far. I think this is one of the first times I've had the comparison shot almost like an evolutionary chart. Usually it's kind of all a hodgepodge because there's so many different kinds. So obviously right here is the Lightning one. This is the Legacy release, this is the original 90s release, and then this is the Action Hero release that they did during Super Mega Force for the anniversary. So you can see that in most ways, like usual, I think it's the best all-around release. You know, this one obviously has the more muscly proportions, although I like the head sculpt on that one. I don't think it's perfect, and it's a little bit squished, and it looks this is one of those times it looks funnier on the camera than in person, but I don't think it's that bad of a head sculpt. Like, I still kind of dig the Legacy and Space ones, to be honest. Obviously, it's a great improvement over the original release. As I usually say in these reviews, not to mention the retro reviews for those are kind of more fun to collect if you like collecting retro collectibles. It's not like, oh, I want the best, most accurate sculpt, I'm going for this one. It's more like, hey, I like to knock Andros over with my finger. It's more like, hey, I like retro releases, let's get this. And these Action Hero ones weren't bad. I honestly still kind of like them for what they were. But this was honestly one of the weaker and stranger ones. Like, this is so boxed in. It looks like someone like got overzealous in Microsoft Paint or something. And then the little symbol here is like blacked out, so it looks strange. It looks like he's trying to black out his license plate, but it's his symbol. So, you know, none of these are perfect, but I do think the Lightning release is the best all-around one so far. And I also do notice that he has a little bit of a darker red color, and I'm not sure which one's the most accurate. I feel like it's one of those cases where it depends on what shot you're looking at. Okay, so now we have Astronema here, and as you can see, they've chosen one of her early season haircuts. She had a ton of different haircuts that if she's popular enough, they could probably make some interesting different releases with. But for this one, we have the default original one, or one of the original ones from early on, which works well. And accessories-wise, as you can see, she has her signature staff, which I'll get to in a second. And then on her, she just has 2 holding weapons hands, and then she just has 2 closed fists. And then she has her purple lightning effect part. And then a cool little effect bonus is she has her boomerang, which if you recall, she used in the episodes where she turned good briefly when they first found out she was Corone, and like all the Rangers were kidnapped, and she said, duck! And then she threw this boomerang at the Quantrons. She might have used it other times, but this is the time I remember most because it was such a badass scene, and I think that's a really cool addition. And I think her staff is pretty decently painted. You know, maybe it could be a little shinier, but for the most part, I think it's pretty good. And, you know, I didn't do any sort of measuring or anything like that, but I do feel like it's supposed to be a little bit longer because I recall a lot of the time she would slam it down to the ground, and I feel like she really has to reach, so I feel like maybe it was meant to be a little bit longer, but that's not necessarily a huge deal, and I might even be off base about it. Maybe she was on, like, a platform where the ground was shorter and she could slam it down, but I just remember her being like, boom, destroy them, but now she's like, wait, I'm trying to destroy them. But detail-wise here, you have a unique case because she's not in a Ranger form because she's not Lost Galaxy Pink yet, so her main sculpt is just the civilian head sculpt, and I think they did a pretty darn good job on it. Like, it's not perfect, but I think it's pretty dang close to what Melody Perkins looks like. You know, there's definitely been some mixed bags as far as the civilian heads go, but I think this one is pretty dang solid, and I'm pretty happy with it. And, like, I think the hair looks good. The only problem you really have is that because the hair is, like, long and goes over here, it does hinder your articulation a little bit. You know, you can pull it off and maybe move it around, but between the hair kind of blocking it off and then the armor, you do have some problems there with that. And I do think I have 2 other little nitpicks. One of them is that even though I think the armor looks decent, I think it could look a little bit less cheap. It does lean a little bit more towards that gray cheap plastic, and I think they could have made it shine a little bit more to make it look, you know, well, just less cheap. So that would be nice. And I do think this paint here is a little bit weird. I think it's meant to, you know, reflect this mesh, and it just looks like a secondary sticker, but that's not a huge deal, but I thought I'd point it out. And the only other like major nitpick I have is the hands are a little bit difficult to deal with, and it could just be mine, just like some people have loose joints and others won't. My like hands here are a little bit hard to get it open to get the weapons into, and then when you're switching the hands out too, they're a little bit stiff and just kind of hard to deal with, and it doesn't help that she has tinier hands. And again, that could just be mine, but it's just something I noticed, and since it's a review, obviously I would call it out. But that being said, setting those little nitpicks aside, I'm still really happy with the figure. Like I said, the head sculpt I think is pretty dang accurate. Everything else I still think looks pretty good. I think the proportions look good. Even though the paint details aren't perfect on it, I still think it looks really cool, and it certainly could have looked cheaper and more half-assed, but I think this looks pretty cool. And then you have your standard articulation here with your ball joint here. Little bit of hindering here. This can move up a little bit, but it's a little bit hinder. Swiveling, double elbow joint, swiveling at the fist, ball joint here at the leg, swiveling at the leg, double knee joint. You have your hinge joint here at the foot. You have the waist and chest articulation, and then of course, like I said, you do have the head and neck articulation that's possible, but it's hindered by your hair. But this isn't a perfect figure, but I'm pretty happy with it despite that, because Astronema is one of my favorite villains, and I think it's pretty nice to get a pretty dang good Astronema figure right off the bat. So that's about it for this one, guys. Overall, like pretty much every Lightning Collection release, this one isn't perfect, but I still really like this set. Mainly, I'm really blown away by us getting an Astronema figure so soon, and even though also, again, like it's not perfect, but how well done it is, in my opinion. I think it's a really good figure. In Space is my personal favorite season, so even though In Space Red isn't perfect, I still think this is a really cool set, and I can definitely recommend it to In Space fans, especially for the Astronema figure. You know, there's a good chance we could double dip later with Red, maybe Astronema with some different hairstyles, but in the meantime, just looking at this set on its own and not thinking about future releases, I definitely can recommend it to In Space fans, like I said, because it's imperfect, but a really cool set in my opinion. But that's about it for this one, guys. Until next time, like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you can notifications from my videos. Dawson Rider, signing out.